Okay, welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to the SAS Viya Transition Topics office hours. So before we get started today and I pass things over to Oren, we're just going to go over a few administrative announcements. Please remember to stay muted to minimize interruptions throughout our office hours event. Use the Zoom chat to ask questions related to the office hours topic. Team members will be answering questions using the Zoom chat and verbally throughout the session. Answers for all topic related questions received throughout the office hours will be posted to our Confluence space to portal after the meeting concludes. And then all meeting materials will be made available in the CCSQ DNA portal after the event. And then just a reminder, if there are any outstanding questions, the last few sessions the team's been really diligent about answering questions in the chat. But if there are any outstanding ones that we don't get to, or that we need to circle back to, we will make sure that all are published and that we get answers to those. So with that being said, I will pass things over to Oren to tell you more about today's topic and introduce himself.
Excellent. Thank you. So I will share my screen and we can get started. All right, so we are here today to talk about an intro to Databricks SQL and to functions. And yeah, those are pretty much our goals. We want to start talking about Databricks SQL, and we're going to talk about using how to use variables in Databricks SQL queries. We're going to talk a bit about functions in Databricks SQL, and we'll talk a bit about when doing functions we have time. We're going to discuss using Spark SQL and Python and give a bit of an introduction to that. And then we're going to discuss importing and exporting Delta files. And we're going to discuss how we can read notebooks from other notebooks and how we can create config files doing that. And we're going to discuss the importance and how to create functions. And I mean, the reasons for why I want to do this is the first reason is, you know, to use SQL, that's going to be your first step towards building processes in Databricks. As SAS programmers, you guys might not be so familiar with R or Python or PySpark or any of that, but you hopefully have some familiarity with SQL. So being able to use SQL is just going to be your first way of being able to do stuff in Databricks. And then we're going to talk about Delta because that's how Databricks prefers storing data. It gives it a bit of, it helps give a bit of metadata. It's a bit faster than some other methods. It gets it metadata so that when we have unique catalog, we'll be able to do some cool stuff with that. And just knowing how to read and write those things is going to help you. And we're going to discuss how to create config files and we're going to create functions. And the idea is if we create functions properly, it should allow for significant reduction in code because instead of having to write code over and over and over and over again, you write it once in a function, you just call the function each time you need it, and it saves time. And it's going to make your life easier when you're converting code from SAS to Databricks. Okay. So you're probably familiar with this, but Databricks notebooks, they support Python, R, Scala, and SQL. In general, we're focusing on Python and SQL. We're going to be doing some more R stuff in the future, but those are the basic ones we're looking at. And there's a few ways you can use Databricks. The first is you can use the catalog over here. You can store data in that catalog. And data stored in the catalog, that's designed to use SQL to edit it or to manipulate it, right? And the pros to keeping the data in the catalog, it uses SQL, and SQL is easy to use. Most of us are familiar with it. And it's in a catalog, so things run a bit faster if it's in the catalog. It's already in a table for you, so you don't need to worry about creating the schema, stuff like that for you. The weaknesses are that SQL is limited. You can use our basic querying, you can use it to only manipulate data in the catalog. There's limits to what you can do with SQL. You'll hit it pretty quickly. And so you want to keep data in the catalog when necessary within the table format, but you have to be careful of what you do with that. At some point, you're going to want to do more things than just that. You may want to grab data that's outside of the catalog. When you're working with data that's in the catalog, you want to make sure to specify a schema. And if you don't specify a schema, Databricks is going to save your data in the default schema. default schema can be accessed by anybody, and it can be a data that can be deleted by anybody. It's basically a free-for-all. So anything, if you don't specify a schema, then yeah, your data is definitely not safe. So you're gonna want to specify a schema. You're probably gonna want to specify your team schema, and depending on what team you're on, that schema might be different. Okay. So this is a basic idea of SQL, and just to show you, when we create a notebook, we can define what language we want. So if we go up here, I can define the default thing for it. I can say whether I want Python, SQL, Go, or an R. And then in each command, I can also specify what I want. So here, the notebook is a Python notebook, so it presumes everything's going to be in Python. But if I want something to be different, I can change it right here. And the one difference is here I can choose a markdown, which basically just a block of text. It's useful if you want to like make comments or something, or you want to make some text known. You want to explain what your program does. So you have text in your markdown, and it basically just makes text prettier. So anyway, we're talking about SQL, and here we are doing some basic SQL stuff. So here, if we were to run this, for example, this would just do a basic next problem, and you would run it, you would get 6. And also, if you want to do some other things, maybe you want to play with some functions. Here we're doing a substring, things like that. If you want to do open arrays, you can do this. And this would get you 30 arrays start at 0. If you want to do a map, that's sort of like creating a dictionary, you could do something like that. If you want to query a table, this would give you the number of records in this public data.cdr info. If you want to, if you want the information out yourself, you might use select current user, now print your email address, or you might ask whether you're a member of admins or something, or a member of a group. Basically, these are just some basic things you could do with SQL. It's largely similar to what you've seen before if you've ever worked in SQL and other stuff. Like substring is pretty normal, field math pretty normal, some of this other stuff, largely normal. And yeah, it does allow some other functionality. And we're not quite there yet. We need to get to runtime 14.3. I believe we're at 12.2. But we are going to be able to create variables and functions. And here I am creating a variable. So here, what I'm doing is I'm saying I want a variable my var. I want it to be an integer, and the main value, default value is 17. And in theory, I can use this elsewhere in another statement. So if there was something that, I don't know, suppose I am running a process, I'm doing a whole bunch of SQL queries, and for some reason I have one thing that's going to change, and I don't know, maybe I want to save data files with today's date or something, or maybe I want to save it with my user ID. I could create a variable at the start of my notebook, and I can have it equal to either the day's date, or I could have it equal to, like, say, my initials. And then I can use this variable all throughout the program, and I don't need to worry about changing every one spot. So it's sort of like a SAS macro variable. And I can do it for integers. Here I can do it for strings, and I can drop them. I can also create a structure. Think of a structure sort of like a dictionary. Basically, this structure right here, we have two variables, street and number. The value for street is scribbled place. The number is 12. And so let's say I were to do something like this. If I run this select statement, so this select statement, and I can't run it right now because it requires 14.4 requires a cluster that has 14.4. I'm only at 12, we're at 12.3, I think it is. So it won't work right now, but at some point it will work. But if we did have the right stuff to run this, so this my var, it would take the integer value here in order to return a 17. The structure gets saved. You have to call it by using a session. So I would do the session at that, and I would do address, and that's going to give me that's going to call my structure. And then it's going to look for number, which is right here. And this would return 12. So this select statement can be 17, and this would be 12. And if I want to do this is how I could drop it. And And then also suppose I wanted to, oh yeah, suppose I wanted to call a data set. I wanted to define my data set name is up above at the start of my program, and I don't want to change it every time. Here is how I could use that there. And this would grab a data set name and it would give me my identifier. It would identify, it would give me whatever that data set name was named as. Okay, we can also use SQL to create SQL functions. And this is one of the ones that Databricks does. Basically, this is computing Fahrenheit to Celsius, and it requires two inputs. It requires a unit field, which is going to be capital F, or honestly, it could be anything else. But it requires either a capital F, or you can put it in literally on the other string and it will just say Celsius, it won't work. And then it requires a temperature field that would have a Fahrenheit temperatures. And it's going to return a value. And basically what's going to do is we're returning, it's going to do a case. It's going to say when the unit is F, then we're going to do this formula, which converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. Also, it's going to return a temp. And then I go here, and here we are using this function. And it's being defined, the output's going to C temp. So I guess if I had 32 as my Fahrenheit, this would give me, if I ran this function, this would give me a Celsius temperature of 0. And yeah, so just some cool things you can do with Databricks SQL. Yeah, so Databricks, what you have to understand about Databricks is it's built by the same people who designed the Apache Spark. And Databricks SQL is largely, but not completely based on Spark SQL. And this is why it makes sense that you want to use PySpark or Spark wherever possible. Databricks has decided to work with Spark, and if you're using stuff in Spark, your stuff is going to run faster. You have a lot more resources to run things in, and and that means that instead of running code using Databricks SQL, you can use Spark SQL, and they're largely the same, but there's a few differences because Databricks SQL is meant to be SQL centric, whereas Spark SQL is designed to work with Python. And so let's just go back up here. When we ran stuff up here, we didn't worry about any Python stuff. We just ran per SQL, and we didn't have to worry about anything else in Python. And when you run the Spark SQL stuff in Python, like so here, if you look at this command in Python, so we're running everything in Python. You sort of need to be able to do things that are in Python. And for example, what that means is, so we get some advantages, some disadvantages. One advantage is that we're able to define variables easier. And you're even able to do it right now instead of having to wait till we upgrade our clusters. So for example, here we're using some Python code. We are creating a variable DS name, and we're using the info. We're saying that the value is CDR info. Here, this shows one of the weaknesses. Well, this doesn't. This shows one of the weaknesses. Here we're doing a select count star from it. But if I just ran a select count, it wouldn't actually show anything. And that's because this by itself, it doesn't show anything because you're not actually doing an action. You would need to do an action to do something, and that means you need to know you have to do a dot display to get the show. And if you use that dot display, it shows. So if I were to delete that and run this would just do okay, and you would get the count. So that's just one of the reasons why there's a slight difference between the Spark SQL and Databricks SQL in that you need to know small things like this. It's pretty easy to learn with a bit of experience, but you just need to get used to it. That it's a bit different. You need to have that display as opposed to per SQL where you would need to do that. And then here, so this would show you our info here. This would actually use the variable we defined up here. So this DS name, that is how you use a variable, and this will give you the same result as this. And then down here we have a query that we use, and I think it's created by one of my team members, and this just shows how you can use some variables and how you can create some things, and you can use that to use a Spark query. So you can see that using Spark SQL in Python is going to give you a bit more functionality, and Databricks SQL is going to be a bit easier. They're 95% the same, but there's a few small differences. Fine. And you can also use Databricks SQL or Spark SQL to replicate existing SAS macros. They're used to move data from SAS to CDR. For example, suppose you wanted to run something that works like Hive exec SQL. So this is a create table, and I am creating this table on OrangeBlueMe2 as OrangeBlueMe1. Basically, going to grab all the records from this and create a new table. And yeah, voila, I would have my new table if I had to run this. And if I wanted to access it, I would just do a select count star. I'd have to make sure I ran my dot display so that way it ran. And if I wanted to do a drop table or replicate something like that, I could do a drop table of exists, and then we get that. Your your functions are going to change a bit for how to manipulate SQL when you move from SAS to Databricks. In SAS, you needed to there were some connections we need to do behind the scenes for you to actually be able to connect. So we need to give you macros that would do SQL statements for you. Now that you're in Databricks, the data is stored in Databricks and you're working in Databricks, so you don't really have that connection issue. So you're not going to create things just to do basic SQL statements, but you may want to create functions to improve your SQL queries, or maybe you want to build a function. You're going to make functions to either do QC checks to make sure certain things are there. Like maybe before you do a SQL query, you want to make sure that all the variables in your select statement actually exist. So maybe you add in some functionality to test that. Or maybe you want to make sure that I don't know, maybe make sure your join makes sense. So you add something in there. One of the things you could do, and I'm not sure if I have it here. Yeah, one of the things you could do is you could build in an alter table. And yeah, that's what I said there. You have an alter table, but what you could do is you could add it, you could create a function that creates a SQL statement and then does the alter table for you automatically. And that way you don't need to worry about, is my file saved under my name or is it saved under my group's name? Because then it's saved under my name, nobody else can access it, and it gets unfortunate. So you could do something like that. You could also use Spark SQL to determine information about the current user and like which group they belong to. And suppose we do something like this. So this is going to show you the current user. It's going to define it. And then I could execute that query and I can print out the result. And then it's going to show, it's going to show who actually ran the stuff. Or maybe I want to see which group the members are part of, so I could print that. And something like that comes into handy when you're working on something where like you're working in a team of 10 or something, and anybody could run something. You want to know who the last person to run something was. So you have that select statement in your code, and it's going to print each time somebody runs it. That way, you know the last person who ran it, and that way you can see what happens, and you can say, well, okay, I know something's weird here. I look at the last person who ran it. I can ask them if I have any questions about what's happening. I know who was the last person to run things, so I know who to go to if something goes wrong. And here we just have some code. Maybe you want to store it in a list, and we have some code right here. We can do that. Okay. So we talked about data that's in the catalog. What about data that's not in the catalog? And data that's not in the catalog, you're not going to be able to get with just pure SQL. It's sort of like a SAS file, like suppose you're working in SAS and you have a CSV, you can't just work with the data right away. You need to do an import. So here also you'll need to do an import, and that means you'll need to pull the data using Python. We've discussed this a number of times in data camp, so I'm only going to go over a few things here. But just as a start, you have this. This is how you pull data from the CDR into a PySpark data frame. And yeah, for some reason I created this function which, yeah, it's basically going to take a SQL query. It's going to print something out into a PySpark data frame. And basically, if I were to run this, I would take all the data from public data.zip code, and I would export it to this zip code DF data frame. And now suppose I I have Delta data tree, so I want to import that into a PySpark data frame. So here I have some code here, and this would be in theory here right here I have a variable, and these might be something you might consider doing to make your life easier, because if I suppose I have 15 files, I suppose I have 15 files from my folder I need to bring in. I don't want to take this for each one. So I define this as a variable, and then I define that as a variable. I use this plus sign, I add this code to it, and now I have a path. And instead of having to write this out 15 times, I just do something like this, and maybe I could do something like that, and I can change this to 21, 22, fine, 23. I change this to 20, 22, change that to 23. And it's a lot easier than just having to remember this whole thing out. And then here you do a spark.read.format, and format I'm reading as delta. I am loading that path, and this puts it into a data frame, and this would actually show the data frame. Okay. Suppose now what you're probably really interested in is you probably want to know how to get SAS7 BDAT files into a data frame, because yeah, you probably have a lot of data that we've been working in SAS, and that's the main way that we work with data. And we are working on getting the Spark SAS7 BDAT package going on the clusters. I know that is in testing, and that is supposed to make things much faster. It's supposed to be a very good way of getting data into getting SAS7 BDAT files into Databricks. Until that happens, we have this function called PyReadStat. And this PyReadStat, basically, it's a package created by somebody else. And basically, it takes these SAS7 BDAT files and moves it into a data frame. And here, for example, we have a function, and this function you would put in an S3 location, and it would spit out a PySpark pandas data frame for you. And you can see this is an example of how we'd use it. This would take us this file that is in this location, and it would convert it into a data frame called example, and also metadata example. And that metadata is something you could use. You could run things on if you want to make sure your thing was working right, had all the things that you were expecting. And if you want to export a Delta file, yeah, that's what you want to export a Delta file to S3 from a Spark data frame. So here you would put the data where you want the data, and then you would just do this right. You would probably want to overwrite anything that was there, and then that'd be just how you do that. And then you could just check right now to see if you can read it properly. Do we have any questions at the moment?
All questions have been answered so far in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so let's keep on going. So when we were in SAS, and suppose we wanted to grab programs, suppose we wanted to grab a program in the program that we were running things in. So suppose, for example, we want to run a shell program where what it has all the programs we wanted to run, but instead of pressing run each time, we would put it all in one program, and that way it would run literally. I'd be able to control how they ran. And so instead of having to run each program individually, I just run one program that calls all the programs. So suppose I had a 12 program process that took, say, I don't know, 40 hours, and some programs might finish at 3 in the morning. I didn't want to be awake at 3 in the morning to run the next program. So what I would do in SAS is you would use an include, and that would run a different program side of the program you're running. And this allowed us to create an auto exec stuff. It would allow us to do the shell thing. In Databricks, you can do something similar. You can also run a notebook inside of another notebook. And this allows you to, it's really useful for if you have a config file that has like functions and stuff. It's less useful to shell program stuff because you'll use workflows for that. But yeah, suppose you have functions stored you have functions stored, you have a code base, you want to use your code base, you don't want to paste all your code base into a notebook, and you don't want to look through your code base, which might have hundreds of functions, just to find the six that you need to paste it into a notebook. So instead of that, you could just create a notebook that has all your functions, or maybe it has maybe defined as certain types of functions, and maybe you have many configs. There's many different ways you can do it, but you can actually do something similar in Databricks. And the way you would do that is if you ran something like this. And what this is doing is it runs a percent run. It's going to run the one dot means it's going to look for something that's in the same folder as my thing is in, as this notebook is in. And it is going to look for a file called topic for config. When you use this run command, there are certain things you need to know. It has to be the first thing you run in your command. It really should be the only thing you run in your command. And if you run comment, you can get yourself into trouble. Because sometimes if you put a comment before the run, it will not work. And that's not behavior we would expect. Like normally comment's not gonna mess things up. Here it will. So if you're gonna call a notebook, just make sure to have that percent run be the first thing in there, the only thing in there, and it should be easier. And let's take a look at this topic for config. So if we go there, and actually if we oh, okay, yeah, and if we were to go to the location where all is stored, you would see this is one of the programs in there. But here we have a config file. It has some function for me. And here I'm installing a package. Here I'm running some code. So this, I'm not doing a function, but I am doing a code block, and I am printing it solo print. So here I'm printing out the current user, which is myself. I'm saying which cluster I'm working on, and that way I know things about what I'm doing. Here I have a few more functions that just use the basic things. This just returns the character value, and this right here, but this right here just does something cool. This can return two variables. It returns a character and an integer. And this would return the carvar of this return a carvar, and return an int var of 5. And so that's just something good to know that your variables can return multiple outputs. Here we just have something that creates stats7, converts stats7 to that file data frames. And then here we have something, it's pretty basic. It just is going to take a Qt work, it's going to take our workbenches. And basically I put the workbench in there, I put a file name in there, and it's going to spit out the path for me. And this is useful because, you may be working on stuff. It stores this as a root path for me. I might not everyone might know this for my team, or maybe if you do it for your own team, maybe not everyone will know what to do to find your files. So you code something like this, and instead of having to memorize this whole thing, you just remember to use your handy function, and it'll spit out the root path for you. And then we have something similar for databases right here. And then this is just something like a display directory. Here I would insert a file path. And again, I'm using the same best workbench thing so that I don't need to remember all that stuff. But I can also do the folder path, and then it will display any files that are there. And it would make your life a bit easier. It's not as good as the test by a UI, or a UI that can actually, tell you what all of the files are. But it's a start until we can get something better going. Okay, so we've got all the functions in our config. And now we can like see what some of this stuff does. So if I were to run this sucker, this would return this car var, just call it that return car var. And if I were to run this would give me this would return that value that came from this. We would put it into the string. And then if I wanted to run this would run. Then this first line would run, the second line would run. And here, if I were to run this would return two vars. And if again, this one would take the character var, this would take the integer var, and now these had the values there. So just a simple function to show you how they could work. This is just an example of how we could create a data frame. And if we were to run this would take the file in this location. We would create a data frame, and then we could do this, for example. It would show us how many records we have in the file. And here we can use this you can also use functions to replicate some of the macros we ran in staff. And this, for example, this would give me the location of this file if I wanted to know that. And this is if I assigned it to path, then this path value would have the location here of this file. And yeah, a lot easier than remembering all that S3 stuff, which I've forgotten already. So just do something like that. You put it in the path and you'd be good. And another thing you could do is you could run this stuff, and this would help you replicate the detail stuff. For example, this lets you display the files that are in a directory. If I run this, it would show everything in this location. And yeah, you could run that to see anything that's there. You could change it to see what's going on in other places. And it's not going to be great, but it will give you some idea of what files you have in a spot. One of the challenges you're going to face when programming in Python for staff is that when you're in staff, you don't really macros are used, they're not as popular. In Python, it makes sense to do incremental programming where you're creating a lot of functions and you're using those to create bigger things. And you use those like a small building block, and you use those to create some larger things. And instead of just programming in code that only gets used once, the idea is you want to program in functions that can be used many times and can be used by people that may not be as familiar with Python or PySpark. Okay. He added some stuff since last time we had a lot of extra time also. And I see we have extra time now. So this is just something new I want to discuss. And these are Windows functions. And Windows functions are another thing that is used for either Databricks SQL or Spark SQL. And basically the idea behind it is that they operate in a group of rows, which is referred to a window. They're going to calculate a return value for each row based on the group of rows. And it comes in handy if you want like a moving average, or if you want to know like row numbers, or if you want a statistic or things like that. And some examples are like a dense string, and that's good. And you have untile, you have percent rank, you have rank itself, you have row num, you have lag, you have lead. I have descriptions there, but we're going to actually go do an example, and you can actually see what it looks like. So here we have a list of values, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 values, right? And we are doing a bunch of window functions on them. And we can print them out, and we see that, so we see a number of things. We're doing it by A and B. Let's talk about the partition by first. The partition by it's sort of like a group by, but basically it's basically how these steps are being ordered. And the idea is that everything has the same A value, it's all in the same partition. And so when we get that window, it's all going to be treated the same. And then we have order by B, and that's just but you get to your I mean that's your or that's like your how you sort. So we have a number of things here. So here we started with A1 and 2, but this record that was the first one, it's showing up in row 3. And that's because of the partition bias and the order bias. But it's the lowest partition because it's A1, and we only have A1 and A2. A1 is obviously before A2, so that's going to come first. But it is the third value in B2 is greater than 1, so it shows up third. And then we have some things. Let's talk about rank and then shrink. So rank, we have these two as 1, you have this one as 3, and you have this one as 2. So here, the 1 is the first number. So these two are obviously the first thing that show up. The then shrink this is says that these two have the same value. So I'm just going to count that as one value. And since 2 is the second lowest value, I'm going to use a value of 2 here. Rank says, well, these two are two different rows, and 2 is the third row here. So therefore, it's going to show up as a 3. So dense rank basically it takes duplicates into account, and it basically gets rid of all the duplicates. And says I don't care about how many times the duplicate shows up. I only care about the rank is in the values. And rank, it works by, yeah, it basically does, if I have, it looks at the number of rows you have. It says if you're the third row, then you're the third row. And we don't care if the first two are duplicate. It's still the one we're going to be giving you. Okay. And then you have percent rank, and this just shows the percentage of where it is in the thing. And yeah, if we were to go down, you would see apparently we have about 7 of these. So this is number 3. So it's telling me it's 1/3. And yeah, then we have row number, and row number is going to tell me it's basically what it says. It's just the row. But since I did a partition by, it's doing the row as part of the partition. So this would tell me if I were to use that row num, it would tell me I have 7 A1s and I have 1 A2s. And I mean, this is useful. There's a lot of times when you need to have a row number, and that's how you can get it. If you just wanted a row number for each row in your table, you just get rid of the partition by, and you do it like that. And then, yeah, and then there is entile. And entile requires you to add a number. And it's basically it's gonna split records into groups based on your partition, based on based on the values. So here what it's doing is you see how this 0.5, that's where the 1 is. This is split up to 2, all the ones with the values in that first half, those are all going to be 1s. And then the ones in the second half, those are going to be 2s. Basically, it's looking at your A value, and then it's basically using that B and saying if you're in the first half, give it a 1, and if you're in the second half, give it a 2. If I did 3, then it would split things into thirds. If I did 10, it would split things into tens, although I don't really have enough records for that. But basically, that's the idea behind those. Okay. Some other things that we have lag. And here it's the same idea as we saw before. Here we have 4 records. We are participating by A, we're ordering by B. And what lag does is it grabs the value of the record beforehand. And so if we look at this first record, it is actually let's type it as A12. That was the first record here. It's going to be a third record there because we are ordering by B, and 2 is larger than 1. So it goes to 30. So if we look at this first one, it is giving us A1, it's giving us the value of 1, and then it's looking for the record before that first one. The first record is the first record, there's nothing beforehand. That's going to be a null. And then we get to the second one. That's one grabs that one from there, so it gives me a one, it gives me that one goes there, and then I get that. Here I have A1 and 2. I grab this, and this goes there for B. And then here I have A2 and 3, and this is null again because this is my first A2. And since I'm partitioning by A2, I only have one record. That first one is always going to be one. The lead is similar to lag, only does the exact opposite. The lag looks at the record prior to the one that was priorly ran. Lead looks at the one afterwards. So here we have our data set. We have A1 and 1, and this is going to look at what's in row 2. And what's in row 2 is 1. So basically, this correlates to this value. And then here for that second one, we got the lead B because it goes there. And then here we have our null because this is the last one. So there is no value after that. And even though there's a record 4, again, the partition grabs puts 1 and 3 together and puts 4 by itself. So this is null, and then there's nothing after this one. This one is also null. Okay. And here is how to use window name. So here we are creating this table called employees. It's got 4 fields. We have some records here. And what we're doing is we're doing some aggregate functions here. And here we are going to be taking this window, and we're going to be taking the average over that window. We're grabbing the average age, we're grabbing the average salary, we're grabbing the minimum wage, we're grabbing the maximum wage, but only for over the window. We're grabbing the counts, but only for that window. And that window is defined down here. And that's going to be, we're going to do an order by, and it's going to grab the ones that are 2 preceding and 2 following. So here we started with this one, we start with number 1, and it's going to grab, it would grab the 2 ones prior, but there aren't. So it's going to grab the 2 ones after. So it is going to grab 23, 25, and 28. And that comes out to, yeah, that comes out to 25.3. I mean, 28 is 3 more than 25, 23 is 2 more than, 2 less than 25. Yeah, about 25.3. And you can see the average salaries. Also, you're going to take those, you would take those 3 and you would average them out. Not sure which 20, not, there's 228, so not sure which one it would grab. I guess it could grab either. So something to worry about. And then we give you the min salary. Actually, grab both comes to think of it, yeah. And it gives you the min salary for the ones that are 2 preceding, 2 following. It gives you the max salary, and it gives you the number of employees in your window. And that is how you do some Windows stuff. So you should have learned the following from this. You should have a better understanding of how to use Databricks SQL and Spark SQL. You should have some understanding of what's going on there. If you set a command equal to Databricks SQL, you can use per SQL, but you can't use any Python code. If you set a notebook, if you set a command to Python and you do Spark SQL, you can't do per SQL, but you could do Python code. And again, largely the same, a few small differences. You'll get used to it with a few months, but it takes a bit of time to get used to it. So just have those ideas in mind. You should have an idea about how to use variables and functions in Databricks SQL. And that's something that's not quite available yet. Clusters need to be upgraded, but that will happen. When it happens, you'll be able to use that stuff, and it will make your ability to use Databricks SQL a lot more powerful. You should have an understanding about how to import and export data from S3 to data frames or to the catalog. You can do, so if we go back up to, where was it? If we go back up to where we were talking about Delta, In theory, you could use this also to send data to the catalog if you know your catalog S3, and that is a way you could create things. It's a lot more complicated than just using SQL, and I don't know why you would want to, but in theory, you could. And so this just tells you a bit more about how you can do it. If you want to send data to the catalog, again, you can just do a create table as the table specify your schema, your table name, do an as, and get stuff from your data frame. You have to save your data frame as a temp table. But yes, you can look at the data if you want to see more about that, but you should have some understanding about that. You should have some understanding about Databricks window function and how those can be useful. And that's probably going to be something that's potentially new to some of us. If you use Practical a lot, if you use PySQL and you're familiar from borrowing, then you probably have some familiarity. But they're definitely very powerful. It makes people a lot more challenging. It makes it a lot more functional. So that's something to touch. That's something to keep in mind. And I think we're going to be talking more about that in topic 7 if you're interested. And you should also have a better understanding about how you can use functions going forward. Okay. And that's it. Do we have any questions?
There's no additional questions right now in the chat, but and we can wait just a sec to see if any others come in prior to administering our poll.
Oren, Janet's looking for a date example for declare or replace values for in the future.
Or you mean like for like something like that?
Yep.
Yep. So that is an example to create a SQL. Yeah, I mean that is one way you can create a variable using Databricks SQL. Just do something like this.
She was specifically asking about just an example of doing it. Here you've done it with a string or integers, and she was asking about an example with a date variable type.
In theory, it would be, I don't know if I remember all this stuff off the top of my head, but it'd be something like my date, and it would probably be date, and then you would do, yeah, default, and then it would be probably something like, however you, yeah, maybe something like 10, 15, you could do something like that. And
Yeah.
I can't promise this is exactly how it'd be, but it's going to be something close to this. And yeah, I'm sure if you ask the question, we can definitely look at the documentation for it, or we can probably find documentation is probably somewhere that can be found. Okay, if there's no other questions, I will stop sharing.
We actually did, sorry, Orna, I was actually copying them over. We got one that's like nested in the thread there. So when the servers are upgraded, will Python UDFs be available to use in SQL queries?
You definitely will be able to. Yeah, you should. I do
No.
believe so. No.
So no. So the I was typing in a response. At this time, the UDF issue is more related to it's more of an infrastructure component and permissions security thing that we have to build out, and it's not related to the runtime feature. And so that's really where that's coming from. And we are working on it actively. We have an entire team dedicated to working on those, but that's where the hold up on the Python UDFs is. One thing to definitely look into is all the built-in functions. Anyways, even when UDFs do exist, your built-in functions are going to be much more efficient because they're set up to run as on a Java machine code anyways, and they've been all tested out. But we are working on the Python UDFs. And that same Python UDF is the same thing for UDFs with R as well as Scala or even SQL has some UDFs that can be defined.
And then our last question is, where will the recording of today's session be available? Which that's in our DNA portal. And I know we shared a link up above for a different session, but I don't know if the page, Dan, can you speak to that? I don't know if the page has been yet recorded for today's session. I'm sorry,
No, it
the
hasn't.
page for today's session's been created yet in portal.
No, no. I mean, we have one for a previous recording of this, but not for today's yet. Generally, we have to go through and get some approvals and some reviews before we're actually able to put those things and to post those, and that's where our delay is at.
Yeah, so they end up putting in like the transcript from the Zoom recording to make sure it's 508 compliant prior to putting it out. And then the same thing with the Q&A. We want to make sure that we're going through and getting all of the answers fully updated, and everything streamlined and makes sense. And then that will be published. I just wasn't sure yet if the page itself had been created or not, that we had a link. But definitely be sure to keep checking back on our in portal to keep an eye out for when those materials are available. And I believe it was Colton said above that it's generally about a week after the session concludes that everything will be being available and has been like properly gone through and 508'd. So I think with that, I don't see any other questions coming through. Orin, are you okay if we go ahead and move to the poll?
Absolutely. I will stop sharing.
Okay, cool. All right, well, just a quick thank you to everyone who joined, and Orin, obviously, for a great presentation. So we are going to administer a poll now, just giving us some feedback on how you feel that the SAS Viya transition topics office hours have been going, how you feel about today's session, and any questions, comments, or feedback you have for us so we can continue to develop great sessions. Okay, I'm launching that now. And then as you wrap up, feel free to drop, and thank you so much for joining.